Welcome to a Nothing from Nothing production. Hello, everybody. This is Mark Christopher with Bill Turley, and this is the Junction podcast, a podcast about growing up in Brooklyn in the 1970s and 80s. We're hoping to protect the names of the innocent as well as the extremely guilty, and there were plenty of those. Well, here goes. Welcome back to the Brooklyn Junction, and today's episode, which talks a little bit about our shared love for our shared ancestry, Irish Americans, proud Irish Americans, and with Saint Paddy's Day looming on the horizon, it's a very timely episode. Starting off, we had the Dropkick Murphys with Shipping Up to Boston, and it should be mentioned that this experience, while filled with hilarious hijinks, also had some danger element. As I grew up in Brooklyn, if you went into the wrong pub at the wrong time, you might get drop-kicked in your Murphy. But anyways, let's get started. Top of the morning to you, Bill. Top of the morning. How are you doing?
Saints and Begorra to you, Mark. I'm doing well.
So my antecedents go back to County Cork on both sides of my family by way of a brief visit to Newfoundland. They were a sturdy, rough and rowdy bunch for the most part. I remember your dad is a super nice guy, cerebral raconteur.
So my dad was Irish, and he was very proud of his Irish ancestry. My mother's family was from Sicily. My mother was born here, but my grandparents were Italian immigrants. Yeah, it's interesting. My older brother did the 23andMe thing, Ireland, Scotland, England, British Isles. But my mother was pretty, it was interesting. Most of it was Southern Italian. A little bit of, I believe, Northern Italian in there, but there was also Cyprus, Morocco, and like Sub-Saharan Africa, like Bantu, which was pretty interesting, I thought. But have you ever done that genetic?
Yeah, I did, and I was about 8% African.
Really?
And I luckily I know exactly which part of my body
All right, that's it.
was African.
Okay,
I've been very fortunate in swinging some pipe. So as a result, it must be my African lineage.
It's funny, though, when you, one thing that I noticed in Ireland, and I stopped doing this after a while, you meet some of the locals there, whether it's in Dublin or in the countryside, and we took a nice little trip along the southern coast of Ireland. Man, it was fascinating. It really was. He took us through the whole, the Viking era, and there was an area in Dublin where they discovered a Viking ship, and, he talked about, the Easter Sunday, the Easter Monday uprising, and it was just really a really great trip all in all. And it's really the countryside. Like we went through the Ring of Kerry, and it was like something out of Lord of the Rings. It was just magical, Good trip.
Well, I'm very, very proud of my Irish lineage. I think the Irish have done an extraordinary job, which we'll go into at certain points. The great movie Belfast, done by Kenneth Branagh. I don't know if I got his last name correct, but really, really depicts how folks grew up and the stories I would hear, how my grandparents lived. But through their incredible history, there's an enormous amount of pain, and there's an enormous amount of oppression. And you really don't know hatred till you meet an off-the-boat Irish guy who suffered under British colonial rule. Playing Irish pubs all the time, I've run into a few, and there is just like some real deep hatred and resentment for the English. And, it's depicted so wonderfully in that song by Sinead O'Connor. And even if you don't like the music behind it, I encourage listening to the lyrics of this song. It's astonishing. It takes you through some of the deep pain and suffering that the Irish went through.
Okay, I want to talk about Ireland. Specifically, I want to talk about the famine, about the fact that there never really was one. There was no famine. See, Irish people were only allowed to eat potatoes. All of the other food, meat, fish, vegetables, was shipped out of the country under armed guard to England while the Irish people starved. And then, in the middle of all this, they gave us money not to teach our children Irish. And so we lost our history, and this is what I think is still hurting me. You see, we're like a child that's being battered effort has to drive itself out of its head because it's frightened, still feels all the painful feelings. But they lose contact with the memory, and this leads to massive self-destruction, alcoholism, drug addiction, all desperate attempts at running. And in its worst form becomes actual killing. And if there ever is going to be healing,
First of all, have you ever been to Ireland?
No, but I'm scheduled for this June, which I'm excited about.
You should go. I went in 2002, and it was one of the best trips of my life. I went with Elaine and the children. At the time, Brendan was studying Gaelic on his own, which is just a thing he was interested in doing, and it was just perfect. Beautiful, beautiful country. We were there. It was around Easter time, so very early spring, and the weather was surprisingly good. It was around Easter time, so we got there and it was Holy Thursday. Okay, so we were pretty tired. The kids were a little tired, but we really wanted to get out and walk around Dublin. So we went over to the Temple Bar area, and I had never seen such drinking in my entire life. And there were people like passed out on the street and the whole thing. I was told later on that the bars are closed tomorrow. It's Good Friday, getting all their licks in before, the bars were going to close for Good Friday. So it was like you're drinking like it was the end of the world. Yeah. So, as I remember as a kid, family was really big on celebrating St. Patrick's Day. And although my mom was Italian, she always cooked corned beef and cabbage and had the house decorated, and the kids were all wore green, and because of my father's heritage.
Well, I'd love to go, and just to give a brief thing on my history is that my father was a pub rat. He loved going to the pub, and loved golf, and loved Irish type food. Like he'd have stew and shepherd's pie, which I don't know if that's English or Irish, but he would do the English breakfast or the Irish breakfast, with the real ham, bacon kind of thing. And so it was always in our household, and there was a real pride that emerged, and I just was drawn to it. To go to, I love sitting in a pub, and what are they taking the piss? Having a crack. You eat crack, you're having a crack. And it's still in the top 5 things I like to do with the good buddies where we're all sitting around. Being Irish Catholic from Brooklyn, New York, I've got a lot of Irish friends. So I had one good friend, a retired police sergeant. So he said, I'm going to take you to a real, real Irish pub. I'm talking about deep Irish. Everybody that's there that works there and hangs out there is off the boat Irish. Behave yourself. Don't be a loud American. Have your Guinness, eat your spuds, and say thank you a lot. So we go to this pub. I just remember it was dark inside. Half a dozen regulars reading the New York Post, chatting amongst themselves. And we started partying. And this one Irish guy starts coming up to Phil's friends, and he was taking the piss, so to speak, taking the fucking piss. And he kept asking, well, where are you from? Where are you from? Are you from Ireland? Like, why are you here if you're not from fucking Ireland? Giving us a bit of a hard time. And so 2 or 3 individuals basically says, I'm Irish American. And he goes, were you born here? And the guy says, yeah, I was born here. Well, then you're fucking American, for Christ's sakes, And he wouldn't take this, oh, my grandfather was from Dublin, None of that counted. You were now an American, and in the pejorative sense, a narrowback. And so finally I suss out what's going on, and he comes over to me, says, where the fuck are you from? Where are you from? Confrontational, and I spun in my chair, and I did my best John Wayne voice. Says, I'm a goddamn American, and I'm fucking proud of it. Get off your horse, pilgrim. And he said, well, that's a fucking good answer, That's a fucking straight, proper answer. The rest of you motherfuckers are full of shit. That's the way you answer. You're a fucking American. I'd be fucking proud of it. So my first St. Paddy's Day parade experience was when I was 13. And I know that for a specific reason. I get on the subway, the IRT, with a bunch of beers, Heinekens, all sorts of beers and stuff. And I'm with this other guy, Brian, and we take the subway in early and we're drinking on the subway. Everyone's drinking. Again, I'm 13, okay? And
Okay.
as we get into the city, the streets lined with everybody
Cool.
partying. And he beelined, which to this day I find such an odd experience, but we actually went into a peep show. First
You're
thing we
like
did, we went
13.
up to Times
Yeah.
Square and we go into a peep show, and I saw some things for the first time. Let's leave it at that, right? And finally, we got kicked out. They saw we were young, and they kicked us out. Um, and then as we're going into bars ordering drinks. Now I had a little cap on, but they had to be able to tell I was as young as I was, 13. And we're drinking and partying the whole way around the parade. And the parade, in my opinion, for the most part, is relatively pedestrian, right? It's, some bagpipes, some nice dancers. It's a parade. You've seen one, you've seen them all, except for the Thanksgiving Day parade. And so we're enjoying the parade and walking around, and all of a sudden we run into my eighth grade English teacher, bombed out of his mind. It is frigid cold. An Arctic blast just sort of ran through the streets that day. And he is bombed standing on top of a pile of garbage bags, peeing at the parade. you know, and it was one of those other pivot points in my life, and which I've written about and what we talk about on the podcast, where you look at your the folks that were supervising you, the adults. You finally realize how flawed they are, and how they're just all human. So he's bombed, and we go up to him and we start kidding around with him and says, "Mr. Wan, I don't think I'm going to do any homework for the rest of the year." And he's like, "I don't give a shit what you do. Go screw yourselves, you guys." And he gets pushed. A cop comes and pushes him into the pile of the garbage bags because of obviously peeing into the parade. And I said, "Okay, it's time to go." And then one of his friends caught up with us and says, "Please don't talk about this at school, blah, blah, blah." He was a nice enough guy. So it wasn't, but it was just astonishing to see him bombed. So as we're walking up with the parade, enjoying the city, and we're freezing, and we buy another six pack. And so you drink your cold six pack while it's frigid, and we find our way into the vestibule of the Chinese embassy. To this day, I find that astonishing. We are in the communist Chinese embassy, and we're in the vestibule. And back then, I guess they were unprotected. I don't know. It could have been consulate. It could have been, but it was. I spoke to Brian, and he told me what it was. Right. So we're sitting in the vestibule, and it's a smattering. There's a young couple. There's an older couple. There's just normal people, and there's a cop, and he's not giving a shit. And in fact, he's kind of trying to, but we say, "It's so cold, bro." We give him one of our beers. He drinks one of the beers, and we're hanging out and we're having a good old time. And then all of a sudden, there was a phone on a table to the right of the door. And I see this elderly Chinese woman reach in, go up and grab not only the phone, but the table itself and bring it back into the consulate. And I was like, "Yeah, I don't blame her. I don't blame her." And we were asking to use the bathroom, and they were like, "No, no, 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 no." And so about 10, 15 minutes later, the a bunch of cops, like sergeant, shows up, and he sees one of the patrolmen, and he goes, "Jerry, what the fuck? What are you letting these kids hang out and party? And in the goddamn vestibule of the embassy? What the hell is wrong with you?" He goes, "Oh, it's freezing out there, boss." And so he goes, "You kids get out of here, or I'm going to write you all up with tickets," right? And we get thrown out of that embassy, and then everyone else must have got the word because there was nowhere else to go to get warm. So we have this wonderful night, day following the parade. And at the end, we see literally the end where they're closing it down, which was kind of interesting, shutting down the parade and ending the parade and all that. And as we head back, and it's the Central Park Zoo is there, and this guy was a little sketchy, and he starts just like, I don't, it was like a polar bear, right? And he starts like throwing rocks at the polar bear. And I have this argument with him. I'm 13, I'm bombed. It's
Right,
around 10
right,
o'clock
yeah.
at night. I'm in Manhattan near Central Park, which was dangerous, right? And he's like, oh, you're such a, we
Yeah.
just have this argument about me telling him stop doing that or I'm going to go. And he says, go, then I don't give a shit. And so I go and I take the subway home. It's probably 12 midnight, 13 bond, maybe $1.50 in my pocket. And I get home safe and live to tell the tale. But that's what it was like growing up in Brooklyn and in New York City in the 1970s.
So let me ask, I have a riddle for you. What's green 2.5 miles long and has an asshole every 3 feet?
I'm not sure, Bill, but don't be mean.
There's the St. Paddy's Day parade. There you go. So
We did grow up with a few of those.
you better believe. Do you know that it's the first parade was held March 17th, 1762?
62. That's
It's crazy.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a long-standing tradition in New York City.
I haven't been in a long time. I used to go with and combine it with a Knick game. But I hope it was a mess 10 years ago, but I've heard it's gotten a lot better, meaning there was drunks on the street everywhere. And I've heard it's gotten a lot better.
So, just getting back to the St. Patrick's Day parade itself, I remember, of course, when I was younger, I didn't go to the parade, but I can remember being home with my mom and watching it on television. And it was on Channel 11 WPIX, and it was hosted by Captain Jack McCarthy, who did I remember he used to show the Popeye cartoons in the air. And then Officer Joe Bolton was on after that. I don't know if you remember that. He did the Three Stooges. And, but Captain Jack McCarthy was funny. My mother used to say, his brogue gets thicker and thicker every year.
What was a great mystery is why the captain gave way to the officer. Why did Bolton never get promoted? And what do we have about kind of funny Irish cops hosting all the cartoons in the afternoon, kind of? But they were dominant at the parade, always was.
Of course, the Emerald Society, the Irish American police officers would march. I think they had the Colombian Society, the Italian American police. And, now it's just every group in the city and would march. And the politicians, of course, always made a showing there. But, what was funny about St. Patrick's Day, too, is a big part of it was the corned beef and cabbage meal, right? And of course, St. Patrick's Day usually falls right, in the middle of or at the beginning of Lent. And what happens in Lent? You don't eat meat on Friday, right? If you're a Catholic. So what happens if St. Paddy's Day falls on a Friday? Got to get special dispensation from the bishop to eat meat on Friday, right?
You won't, you won't find me eating any cabbage anytime
Yeah.
soon. No, cabbage gives me gas. Cabbage gives me a little gas.
I don't want no potato. You know mashed potatoes give me gas.
Yeah, but I always thought it was pretty fun. And there were some bishops in the diocese who would not give the special dispensation. It was like, oh no, this is very strict. And I think at one time, and even before it might have been Vatican II, you couldn't have meat on any Friday, not just
But
Fridays
the
during Lent.
the construct is they were trying to support the fish industry. It's a total
No, I beg to differ,
What was
Mark.
the
The
reason?
reason that they did it was it's a form of self-denial, okay? Because back in those days, anybody could get fish. All you had to do was, stick a pole in the water or a net and you could catch a fish and eat. So poor people could eat fish. But meat, poultry, that sort of thing, pork, that was a luxury. And it was something that was really not accessible to many poor people. So um, to give up meat was a real form of denial. And to substitute fish for meat, you were, the people who could afford it were really giving up something. And so today, it's like, I mean, if you're following strict Catholic guidelines, um, you're forbidden from eating a hamburger on Friday during. but you could have lobster thermidor, which makes absolutely no sense. Okay, it's a fish meal. It's not a meat meal, but it has nothing to do with the um, Christ suffering or the flesh and blood of Christ. Right? It has nothing to do with that. It's all a form of denial. But and yeah, I had
I
heard that
thought it
thing
was
about.
because they were trying to give a goose to the fish industry.
Yeah, the Vatican's had an interest. The Vatican had an interest. I don't think any of that's correct. It's a form of denial that makes really no sense in the modern age, where fish is like what a shrimp like $25 a pound or something like that, and you can get a hamburger for $1 in McDonald's. It makes no sense. But so we had this family story. This is on my Italian side, um, and I don't know whether it was true or it was just an intimidation story, but my grandfather and the old Italian guys were, talking about, the life and solving the world's problems somewhere like on Ninth Avenue and West 47th Street. And they're, the way they would congregate on the corner. And it was Good Friday. And they were all talking about, oh, you can't eat meat today, especially, you can't eat meat on Friday, but especially Good Friday. And my grandfather's like, I would never even think of doing that. But there was this one guy, his name was Charlie, and Charlie said, that's a bunch of nonsense. You know what? I'm going to go out and I'm going to buy a pound of chopped meat today, and I'm going to make hamburgers for dinner tonight, and that's what I'm having.
Okay, Harry did.
So he like defiantly did this on Good Friday. And the punchline was, don't you know, within 6 months, every tooth in his head fell out.
And still playing this one good.
And we would just look at my mother like, oh my God, that's terrible. Oh, because he ate meat on not just Friday, but Good Friday. One of my grandmother's famous expressions was, if you're going down to City Hall, you better paint your ass green. And that meant that, the politicians were all, the old Irish Tammany Hall guys, because she was born in the 1890s. You better show you're Irish if you want to get something done down there.
Well, the same grift exists. It's part of the way the system's been constructed. So
We also celebrated St. Patrick's Day in the bars of Flatbush, right?
we certainly did. We certainly did.
What was Yeah, the big place I think was Nana Daly's, wasn't that the one on
Yep, that
Flatbush
was the
Avenue?
one. And you'd always have an Irish band. My dearly departed, lovely, wonderful friend, Pat Morgan, used to
Oh, of
play.
course, Pat.
I mean, I think about him still to this day. I think he's dead about 5 years. But
Yeah,
he's one of those really rare human beings that was just all about giving and helping everybody, and just a
yeah.
real mentor for me in my life, a real positive mentor in my
His
life.
his his parents were from Ireland. I know at least his father was.
And I remember he had this, I hope I'm not telling tales out of school, but she expected the oldest of the family pretty much to stay home and take care
Okay.
of the family, like
Yeah.
not get married, right? And he
Or go
married at
into the priesthood.
18. He married at 18. And, it was like a minor conflict between them. And, her accepting, I think the father had died relatively young, you know, and,
Yeah.
he was just a fabulous human being, but he got me back into the Irish music, the Clancy brothers. I mean, he bought me the Van Morrison CD.
Near Banbridge town in the county down one morning last July. From a boring green came a sweet Colleen, and she smiled as she passed me by. She looked so sweet from her two bare feet to the sheen of her nut brown hair. Such a coaxing elf, sure I shook myself for to see I was really there. From Bantry Bay up to Derrick Quay, I'm from Galway to Dublin town. No maid I've seen like the brown Colleen that I met in the county down. As she onward sped, sure I scratched my head and I looked
My
with the
dad would
feel
break
in
out
her
the
air.
Clancy Brothers records.
And
I
I
mean, we
said,
listened to
says
them
I
year
to a
round, but especially
passerby
it
who's
was
the
ramped
maid
up
with the
around
brown hair. He smiled at me and he said,
St. Patrick's
"That's a
Day.
gem
And then,
of violence
you
crown."
always heard that what was it, the Irish Rovers doing the Unicorn. That was actually a pretty big hit on the radio. And, New York is really the kind of the epicenter for the St. Patrick's Day because of their tradition with the parade and how far it goes back. But I spent 3 years in Chicago, and Chicago has a major, major celebration of St. Patrick's Day. They actually dye the Chicago River green. The bars have all kinds of celebrations, and they do have a parade, but it's not. I've seen it. It's not quite what New York
Talking about
presents.
Patrick's, was St. Patrick's real?
No, no, he was a real guy. Yeah, he was like, I think he was enslaved at one point, uh, a real person. He was from Britain, and from what I recall, I think he was captured by Irish pirates and enslaved in Ireland. I think his father might have been from Rome, but but lived in Britain. So he has some Italian heritage, I believe. And then he escaped, went back to Britain, and then he came back to Ireland later to preach Christianity and convert all the pagans there. So that was like in the 5th century, I think. That's what they said. He charmed the snakes out of Ireland. I don't know what that's all about, but yeah, he was actually a real person, and he became, later the patron saint of Ireland. But yeah, he was a real guy, real person.
I am very proud of my Irish ancestry, and I'm fascinated by it. And nobody's prettier to me than a nice Irish girl, and I married one. So um, through the years working with fellow Irishmen, hardest workers I've ran into, and it's just amazing what the Irish have accomplished. Over 100 years ago, roughly 100 years ago, there were signs in storefronts, "No Irish need apply," and within 20 to 30 years, they're controlling the local governments, and they win the presidency in the form of John F. Kennedy. Several distinguished Americans, from Elvis Presley to Ronald Reagan, have Irish ancestry. And it's just astonishing that a country that is now about 5.8 million, there were 35 to 36 million Americans who identify as Irish. I mean, they came here, and that's what we used to call in consulting penetrate and radiate. And the Irish certainly have. Well, Bill, this wraps up our segment on not only our Irish heritage, but St. Paddy's Day itself. And happy St. Paddy's Day, and thank you for listening to the Brooklyn Junction. Bill, take us out.
All right. May the road rise to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. And may you be in heaven a half hour before the devil knows you're dead. Is that how it goes? Something like that. Anyway, happy St. Paddy's Day, everyone.
Happy St. Paddy's Day. And remember to listen, like, comment, and subscribe to the Brooklyn Junction. Just sliding away. Written, produced, and performed by Billy O'Turley. And if you don't like it, fuck off.